You're listening to The Deep Dive with Jason Sarney, a Miami Dolphins podcast on the Addicts Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Deep Dive podcast. Jason Sarney here, and we got a fun fantasy guest. He is actually royalty. You'll see him on Twitter as the Deposit King, Peter Overzet. Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing good, guys. In the past year or so, I've adopted the Miami Dolphins as my team after not having a team for a while here. So I'm excited to talk exclusively Dolphins with you guys.
It's going to be great. We're joined by the godfather of the Fanatic Network, Byrne. So hello to you, Brian. Thanks for taking a couple of minutes to talk football with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to meet Pete. Happy to be on here. Love talking fantasy football. Love talking Miami Dolphins. And, Pete, welcome to Fin Nation.
We will take adoption. We will take purebred. We will take, anyone we can these days because now's the time, Peter. I think last year we kind of got a couple of little nice teases in the mess that was that tank situation, but we don't talk about that word particularly here because I don't think that was the case. But you have a fun little story about Patrick Laird. We'll talk a little bit about later in the show, but could you give the listeners and the viewers a little tease on a really fun little Patrick Laird situation from last year?
Yeah, so, Patrick Laird was on some of our fantasy radars pretty early in the season. We're in deep leagues. You're always trying to find running backs, and Laird was someone that was starting to catch passes a little bit for the Dolphins at the end of games and negative game scripts. And, of course, in points per reception leagues, those receptions can be really valuable. So I started talking about Laird, and people would be like, wait, are you seriously talking about this guy? I mean, I barely even know him. And I decided to just kind of have a little fun with it and lean into it and start talking about Laird all the time, basically nonstop. I think one of my buddies counted up the number of tweets I had done about Laird in a given week, and it was over 100. And so then it kind of just took on a life of its own, and Laird ended up catching wind of it. I ended up getting a Laird cake made that I then ate on a Periscope stream, and Patrick was like, what the hell is going on? But he ended up becoming friends with me and Davis Maddock. We did some podcasts, and yeah, I guess the rest is history. So if you ever want to become friends with an NFL player, I just recommend eating a cake with their name on it live on air.
Brian, take notes for Ryan Fitzpatrick. When we really want to go reach for Ryan Fitzpatrick, cake might be the way. Peter, we'll talk the fun Laird situation a little bit later. We'll, of course, quote-unquote, pay the bills and let everyone know where to find the Fanatics. But most importantly, where can everybody find you? After this show, I want everyone who's not so sure where to find your fantasy content to run over, prepare for their drafts, and listen to you and watch your stuff. Where's that going to be at?
Yeah, most of my stuff I post on Twitter at Peter Overzet, and otherwise do a lot of streaming right now, and those all push to my Periscope and YouTube. I do a high stakes fantasy football podcast called Ship Chasing, if you're interested in that. And then and I do some comedic stuff with my friend Denny Carter. So yeah, everything I do I end up posting on Twitter. So that's definitely the best place to check my stuff out.
Beautiful.
Pete, after this show, you'll give me your phone number. So when I'm getting my DFS all set up, I can just get right to you, and you can give me all the hot takes and make sure we win.
Yeah, I just don't want you to get the impression that I have all the answers to the test, because if I did, I would be a millionaire right now, and I'm most certainly not. So I'm still trying to figure it out, just like everybody else. But I'm happy to give advice when I can.
All right.
You're doing something right, certainly, Peter. So, we'll touch on a couple of different specific Miami Dolphins. It's funny, see, you as an adopted Miami Dolphin fan, you're not necessarily, I guess, drinking all the Kool-Aid just yet on how awesome everyone's going to be right away. So we take some things with a grain of sea salt, like I like to say, in our aquatic world here. But speaking specifically from last year, we saw Devontae Parker really kind of break out of his shell. And a lot of components came into that. But before we go into any tape that we'll show for everyone while you speak, anything predetermined about Devontae Parker that you were going to last year? What was basically a year ago today? Where were you with Devontae Parker?
Yeah, I mean, Devontae Parker was a guy I loved when he came out of college as a prospect. He just checked a lot of those boxes that we look for as far as being big and athletic. His best comparable based on his workout metrics and college production was AJ Green. And so I was definitely on that train of like, I think we have the next AJ Green here. And of course, you know, we had the injuries and the issues, but to me, watching Parker, the talent was never in question. You know, it was a lot of kind of circumstantial things going through different quarterbacks, injuries. You know, Jarvis Landry was there for a while and proved to be a target hog. So he never was able to get, you know, the large market share of targets in that offense. But yeah, I've always liked Devontae Parker. And, you know, we see this arc with a lot of guys when they break out later in the career. It doesn't happen that frequently. So to see Devontae Parker break out this late in his career and do so successfully, I think is a pretty cool story and definitely exciting for Dolphins fans to have such an alpha stud wide receiver on their team going forward.
Now, bringing Brian into the equation, excellent stuff, Peter. I love the analysis. Now, what are your fears as a fan, Brian, and a fantasy player? And let's see if Pete might be able to alleviate or be able to curb any enthusiasm or whatnot. As a Dolphin fan, speaking to a Dolphin newbie, but a more of a fantasy-minded individual, let's have a Brian and Peter conversation on what you're thinking. Brian and Peter, you can kind of chime in here.
Yeah, let me cue that video of Devontae Parker so we can have it going in the background, and while I ask Peter some questions about it. So my biggest concerns, I think, going into this season with Devontae Parker, obviously Preston Williams is coming back, and how many, you know, his targets were definitely down when Preston Williams was there. My other big fear for Devontae Parker this year. I really think he got over the injury bug, but my fear will be when Tua comes in, because we know that Fitzpatrick loves to throw the 50-50 balls. Devontae Parker was among the worst in the NFL in separation yards. So it puts a little fear to me that, you know, a rookie quarterback may not have that faith to throw those 50-50 balls. When we talk about Devontae Parker, I like to call him 80-20 balls because that's pretty much what he made him look like. But, you know, and the emergence of Mike Gesicki coming into, I mean, Albert Wilson opting out may help out a little bit, but do you have that fear of switching over to Tua from Fitzpatrick, or how do you see it working out?
The way I've been thinking about it, and again, I guess for this conversation, we'll assume that when Tua does start, you know, that the health is no longer a concern and he's good to go once he steps on the field. But, you know, Fitzpatrick's willingness to push the ball downfield, to throw those 80-20 balls, that bodes well for fantasy. However, it also led to a lot of interceptions, a lot of turnovers, and the offense kind of sometimes stalling out and not getting into the end zone. So I think it could be offset by Tua leading a more efficient offense. You know, a lot of people in comps I read for Tua is that he could really have a Drew Brees style game where he is hyper efficient, moving the offense, getting first downs, getting in the red zone. And so I guess that's how I'm kind of personally thinking about it, is they might be, you know, less aggressive downfield, but if they're continuing and sustaining drives, that's going to result in more fantasy points. So I think you can come up with pros and cons for Parker relative to both of those QBs. But ultimately, I think the way I think about receivers in fantasy production is good players earn targets. And people freak out. Everyone wants to be like, oh, Cortland Sutton on the Broncos with Drew Lock, or Terry McLaurin with Dwayne Haskins. Really good players, it does not matter who their quarterback is. They're going to demand targets, and I think that's going to be the case with Parker.
And one more follow-up question, if you don't mind, Jason. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
Last year, the Dolphins were also usually down 21 points at halftime, and it gave a lot, you know, of the more 50-50 balls because they were just coming from behind. They couldn't run the ball. They had to just take shots downfield. Their defense is going to be a lot better. Their running game is going to be a lot better. Do you feel that that's going to impact not only Parker, but maybe Williams and Gesicki as well?
I think it could. I think another thing though that would offset it is, we see what's going on with Hearns and Albert Wilson, and what I'm now seeing is a really condensed target share here, where it's going to be Parker, Preston, and Gesicki commanding the lion's share of these targets. And the offense is where it gets tricky, is when there's 5 or 6 guys. I always think of like the Bears are a team where you'll have random guys, Taylor Gabriel popping up and getting catches, a second tight end or whatever. So I think, again, it could be offset by a really condensed target share. And I think those 3 are going to be commanding 80 to 90% of all the targets. So that should be good for all of those guys.
I like how you said it, kind of the offset situation, because Brian, you made the point, and you obviously played on that, Pete, where, if you're on the field longer, sustaining drives, obviously everyone has more chance to get production, to have snaps and whatever. But the condensed target share is really tricky to predict who is going to be the leader of those targets. It could be really very tricky. It could be separated by a couple of targets or a couple of receptions each. So when you're looking for value, and this is not a knock on Devontae. This is almost if I'm allowing myself one Dolphin receiver, obviously, I don't love 2 in a team, but if I'm allowing myself one receiver, I'm looking in the early double-digit rounds, 10, 11, 12, and that segues to Preston Williams. He was the number 1 targeted Dolphin receiver for the first 9 weeks, first 8 games before he got hurt against the Jets. He had, I think, 60 targets to Devontae's 51 or what have you. It was off by maybe 7 or 8. But he went down, Devontae went up, Gesicki went up. That's really, I think, the major beef when people are talking about specifically Gesicki is here comes Preston, which is a great thing, and I'm trying to play this off, for lack of a better term, a good problem to have for a Dolphin team, a tricky problem to have for fantasy owners. Preston Williams specifically, where are you on the trajectory of this very young and capable star?
Yeah, no, I think you got to be excited about Preston Williams. And to your point, I think I'm in on both wide receivers at ADP. Parker going around wide receiver 30 in the 5th and 6th round range. And then Preston Williams, where you mentioned in the double-digit rounds. I think, and we'll probably get to this, I'm most concerned about how this pertains to Gesicki, because when you do look at Gesicki's splits with and without Preston, it's pretty stark. I mean, with Gesicki, he was getting 4.43 targets a game. He didn't have any TDs, 3 receptions a game. That jumps up to 4 receptions a game, 0.62 TDs a game, basically every other game without Preston, and then 7.5 targets a game as well. So I do think that that's the dynamic we're headed to. And I really do feel like I think Parker can hit, and then I think one of Preston and Gesicki can hit in a really big way. I just have a hard time seeing all 3 of those guys smashing, and that's why it's a little hard to know who to put your chips on between Gesicki and Preston.
Bri?
Yeah, my biggest fear with Preston is, he had the ACL surgery in week 8. They even say your first year back from ACL surgery, you're not really the same, but it takes 9 months to a year. So, we're not gonna. I don't expect Preston to be killing it right off the bat if he does start week 1, week 2, but definitely getting those legs. The other thing with Preston that is a little concerning, you could tell last year that he was thinking too much, and it led to a few drops, some touchdowns. So I'm a little fearful with another new offense, switching quarterbacks. Will he have that sophomore slump a little bit? I'm confident that towards the end of the season, he's really going to come on. I just don't know how long it will take. But I picked him up in a mock draft in the 12th round the other day. And I just, with that upside, he could be the number 1 receiver for the majority of the season. I like his game a lot more when Tua comes over. I see him, more of a slant guy. I see him more of a separation guy. So I really like that when Tua comes in, but there's definitely some concerns and with the targets going down. But I don't see it as much as going to be Preston or Gesicki, because I think Gesicki is really, I think we're not going to talk about him as a tight end as much as we're going to talk about him as Albert Wilson's replacement in the slot. I think we're going to see a lot lot of slot receptions there. So, but both of those guys, I mean, we talk about all three of them. You get Parker in the 6th, you get Gesicki in the 11th, Preston in the 11th or 12th. They all have high upside. So, I definitely don't want all three, but they're all pretty good gambles.
And I think
do you own shares of any of them at the moment?
I do. I have plenty of shares of both Gesicki and Preston. I actually don't have a ton of Parker, just in that there's so many wide receivers in that range that I like. Earlier, I did mention Cortland Sutton and Terry McLaurin. Those are guys I've been drafting a ton there. DJ Chark as well. Stephon Diggs, another guy I like. And then you're also kind of having to make decisions on, Will Fuller and Michael Gallup in that range. So it's less that I don't, it's nothing against Parker. It's just there's so many good options there that I haven't been getting a ton of him. But yeah, I've been scooping Preston Williams. I just drafted him in a high stakes draft. I need to check the round, but I believe it was in the 11th or 12th round. And yeah, tons of Gesicki. Gesicki's also in an interesting range for fantasy where I like the entire cohort around him in that like tight end 8 to tight end 12. I like Noah Fant. I like TJ Hawkinson. I like Dallas Goedert, and I like Gesicki. So those are kind of the guys we're trying to, catch that big breakout, that tight end who does what Mark Andrews did last year and goes from kind of obscurity to a top 3 tight end. And so I think all those guys I just listed, including Gesicki, have that potential to take that leap.
I love that.
Who's your favorite of that group? Who's your favorite of that group of like that area of the Hayden Hurst, the Dallas Goedert, the Mike Gesicki, the TJ Hawkinson? How would you rank them if you had to?
Yeah, Hawkinson is my favorite. He checks so many boxes that you want to see from a tight end breakout, having that first round draft capital. I think that he has an easier path to being the number 2 option of any of those other tight ends we listed, because really we know Kenny Golladay is going to be the stud wide receiver there. And then after that, you have an aging Marvin Jones and not much else. And we know that team with Stafford likes to throw. So I think Hawkinson could be the number 2 there. Whereas, we're talking about Gesicki, and it's like, well, what if it's Preston Williams there? If you're the 3rd target, on the totem pole, that can really cap your upside. Goddard has to deal with Ertz. But if they go more 2 tight end sets, that could benefit him. And then Fant has the similar issue where Sutton is a stud. They bring in Judy. So he could clearly be 3rd or 4th there as well. So to me, I'm just looking at where can I most confidently project targets. And I think Hawkinson does that. And Hawkinson, the thing about all those guys, though, that we love is they're all just athletic freaks. They're all so physically talented. So if they get the opportunity, they have the physical profile to really succeed with those touches.
Love that. Love Hawkinson. I do love all the guys that you mentioned. It's almost like we're talking maybe 15 to 25 points across the entire season, which is like 1.1 to 1.3 a week here. So just kind of pick your poison. Just to touch on the last couple of seconds of the 2 receivers, we'll get more into Gesicki, but mixing all 3 of those targets, how much stock do you take into matching the player with, let's say, league format? PPR, does one guy go up or down? Standard leagues, half PPR, dynasty, pardon me. But are you saying, you know what, I'm going to target Gesicki in this specific league because why? You know where I'm going with this?
For sure. And definitely with wide receivers, you guys as Dolphin fans are very familiar with the Jarvis Landry years where he was one of the top PPR scorers in the league year after year because of the volume. And it wasn't that he was snapping off big plays, wasn't a ton of yards after the catch, but he was getting, 8 to 12 targets a game, and those points add up. The Dolphins, I think Parker and Preston, I guess I would say I think of them as almost scoring agnostic in that I think they're going to have a decent amount of targets and good TD upside. Normally in standard scoring, you're more concerned about touchdowns because that's such a huge swing, whereas the PPR kind of levels it out. We might get a chance to talk about a guy like Isaiah Ford here down the road. He's a guy that I think gets a bump in PPR formats if he's taking over that Albert Wilson role. Or the Allen Hurns, kind of the possession receiver. And to your point, yeah, I think Gesicki, I would lean toward having him in PPR, although because he's going to have the touchdown upside, I think if you're in a standard ESPN league, he's still a guy I'm targeting in that range.
Brian, does anything like that kind of go your way, go against your way? Do you throw out league formats, or what do you think to what Peter said about Gesicki specifically?
Yeah, the thing that he touched on is the PPR. I really like him in full PPR. It's such a wild card because we don't know when Tua is coming in, but I see Gesicki having a very strong slant game. That's Tua's strength. So I see when that move gets made, he's definitely going to see a huge increase in targets and catches. Outside of that, I pretty much agree with what he had going on there. I definitely, that last one is so hard to call. Is it going to be Isaiah Ford? Is it going to be Gary Jennings? Is it going to be Kirk Merritt? It's going to be a tough go. How do you see it? Kind of just a little off topic, but how do you see it? Do you see either any of those top three guys really excelling with Fitzpatrick compared to Tua, or excelling with Tua compared to Fitzpatrick?
I do think that stylistically, Preston and Parker mesh well with Fitzpatrick because of what we're talking about is his willingness to take shots downfield. Whereas I think, Isaiah Ford's going to probably be operating a little bit more over the middle of the field. Same with Gesicki. So I think traditionally we've seen rookie quarterbacks, there's always the phrase, the tight end blanket, the guy that you're just checking down to over the middle because he's going to be there. And so maybe Tua comes in. That said, rookie quarterbacks also love stud wide receivers. So he could have eyes to lock in for Parker. I think sometimes what happens with those rookies is they don't go through their full progression. The great quarterbacks, they go, okay, he's covered. Now I'm going to 2, going to 3. Sometimes you'll see these guys lock in on somebody, and you could probably make cases either way. Hey, say Tua just locks in on Parker. This is my guy. Or say I'm locking in on my slot receiver or tight end underneath. But yeah, as a generality, I would say Parker is good for those 2 bigger wide receivers. And then Tua might kind of unlock Isaiah Ford and Gesicki a little more, would just be my hunch, but I'm kind of just guessing.
Yeah, well, we love throwing the educated guesses, the darts, we love using the analytics. Now, speaking of the next-gen stats, the analytics, the crazy numbers that, a lot of them, when you mix with the eye test, the tape, what you see, makes sense. Other things to me don't necessarily make the most sense. So is there any stats that you really scrutinize it from a positive standpoint, from a negative standpoint, especially with now that we're talking about a receiver or tight end situation? What are you looking at next gen wise or really heavy analytical?
Yeah, so I'm personally myself, I don't do a ton of analytical research, but I love consuming analytic research as it pertains to fantasy. My co-host on the Ship Chasing podcast, he's been doing a deep dive into tight ends and trying to predict what are the characteristics that really help predict the tight ends that vault into that top 5 territory. And one thing he's really found is that efficiency matters. Being hyper efficient means that once you get the volume to match it, well, then the sky's the limit. And so you'll see conversations going on right now online. People are talking about AJ Brown. He was hyper efficient on the Titans last year, but you worry about the volume. This is a run first team that's going to go through Derrick Henry. How much volume is he going to get? But what we've seen over and over is that betting on these really efficient receivers and tight ends is smart because efficiency means these guys are good and we want good players. And if the volume ever catches up to their efficiency, that's when we get the fireworks and they're the top players at their position. So I think looking at efficiency and trusting that talent is going to rise to the top is really kind of the way to play it.
Speaking of efficiency, so Gesicki and Parker were not efficient last year. They were among the league's worst. How much of that do you credit for not having a running game, not having an offensive line, and Fitzpatrick's arms, it's not as strong as it used to be? Do you really see that as that's who they are, or do you see it more of like the defense knew they had to throw the ball, the O-line couldn't really block anybody? Do you see with that O-line improving a little bit, maybe switching to Tua, or even just with Fitzpatrick in the running game, do you see those efficiency numbers raising for Parker and Gesicki?
Yeah, I think you have to take into consideration that context that you just described. In the running game in particular, we know that it is so much easier to pass when teams have to respect the running game. I mean, I just mentioned the Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown. I mean, teams were loading up the box knowing we have to stop Derrick Henry, and it gave A.J. Brown a ton of clean releases. It gave Tannehill a lot of time in the pocket there. It helps you set up play action. And with the Dolphins last year, teams knew what they wanted to do. And that makes it really, really difficult. The offensive line wasn't great last year either. So they were constantly under pressure. I think you do have to kind of grade that efficiency on a bit of a curve and trust that, the moves that the Dolphins made this offseason, I mean, they are playing the long game. They invested in the offensive line. They are investing in the important positions. And I think that efficiency will turn around here. Maybe not right out of the gate in a massive way, but I think they have laid the groundwork to really turn that around.
I love hearing a non-biased, semi-non-biased.
Semi-non-biased. I'm pretty biased.
Semi-non-biased because look, you're a brother. You're part of the family now. Anyone who could, and before we get into the Giuseppe video, and Brian, I think I just made sure it's up in the files for you, but the tattoo Patrick Laird situation, because I don't want to forget about it. We're not going to go really heavy into the running backs, but a gentleman out there was a big Patrick Laird fan. I don't want to steal the story, but a tattoo happened. Could you give us the overall story and how that specific writing and tattoo came about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm now even trying to remember it. This was after the whole Patrick Laird week. It was after we did the podcast with Patrick, and I think he just, everyone was getting caught up in the mania, and he put a tweet out there that was just like, if this gets 100 likes, I'll get a Patrick Laird tattoo, a Praise the Laird tattoo. And he set the bar way too low because, of course, when he tagged it, we were going to share it. And, getting 100 likes for a tattoo, I mean, everyone's willing to contribute to that cause. So I think he immediately went. I think we could have gotten it if he said 1,000 likes. So he set a pretty low bar. And I remember messaging him being like, I know you have a fiance, I appreciate that you're a man of your word, but no one is going to be upset at you if you need to pull back on this. He's like, no, I'm doing it. The problem is, and this is legitimately a little bit of a bummer, but the guy, Joel, he has vanished from social media. And last I saw, like, his fiance was legitimately upset about this tattoo, that he didn't really run by her. And just doing this podcast reminds me, I need to reach out to him again here and make sure that everything's okay, because I need this story to have a happy ending.
Well, I'm going to give it to you. I don't know Joel. We're going to make sure that Joel sees this, but I spoke to Brian about this, Peter. Now, Brian, as you can see, he's got some ink. He's got some fun stuff. He's got fins, a fins tat. Peter, are you a blank canvas such as myself?
I am completely blank. Yep, just pale skin.
Same here. I'm a completely open slate. So I'd like to put some stipulations out there, but they're heavy stipulations. I will come to Joel's level. And I will offer, I know, now you're talking, now I'm talking, right?
Yeah.
Of the three people that we just spoke about, we're going to have to set some milestones and maybe a Dolphin milestone. I hope Brian's got a nice little smile because I'm going all in. The chips are going in the middle of the table, Peter.
I
need to set maybe, if Mike Gesicki is a top 5 tight end, I might have to talk to you about some tattooage. If Preston Williams scores 10-plus touchdowns, we might have to have a conversation. And if Devontae Parker, I'm going to have to think of something fun for Devontae, but if he can maybe catch 100 balls, because these are not easy. I'm not offering the canvas here for a touchdown and 5 carries or yards from Patrick Laird, all due respect to Joel. But do you think that I'm getting inked if any of those come to fruition? What are your thoughts of my wife getting ticked off here?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, as we know with probabilities, right? Maybe the likelihood of any one of those outcomes might be low, but when you keep racking them on one after the other, they start to become a greater chance. So if we have a 5% chance at one and then 10 on the other, all of a sudden we're up to like a 30% chance one of these could maybe happen. So I like it though. I want to see this in ink, so to speak. I want to see what number you actually put associated with it. I do think, some of those numbers are hard, but attainable. And that's what will make the season such a sweat for you. Will you find yourself rooting against it happening, knowing that you would have to get a tattoo, or would this be all of your rooting interests aligned?
Knowing the way that the universe works with me, Peter, I need to kind of hedge my bets against my own personal and health situation if it means success for the Dolphins. So I'm literally happy to sacrifice body, mind, soul, marriage, personal aspects of me to allow double-digit touchdowns for a tight end, 100 yards for a wide receiver, and Preston Williams to be the next Jerry Rice. I'll do it. I'll do it. Brian, do we need to put something in contract?
So I threw up the Gesicki video as we were talking about this because I think that's the bet. I say if Gesicki finishes top 5 in fantasy points and we'll say standard 0.5 PPR. If he's a top 5 tight end at the end of the year, I say you put the 88 in Forever Inc. There is a funny story about Jason. He was already a little preemptive on the Gesicki and he bought the rookie 86 Gesicki jersey rather than the 88 that he went with. But I think we allow him to get the 88. I say the bet is Gesicki finishes top 5 tight end. We put it in forever on Sarney's body.
I can sympathize to the change because I had I'll see if I can get my camera here. I had my Laird jersey framed there, and then he changed his number. So I think now I got to get a new one with his new number.
Well, I think, I would love to make that happen. Brian, the 88 would look rather nice. I think we have something cooking. And if in fact, I was actually thinking if he's a top 5 wide receiver to maybe put like a Mount Rushmore of tight ends with Gesicki on it with like the other guys. But I think I like the 88.
The reason I like that top 5 cutoff is because I do firmly think there's a top 4 heading into this year with Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, and Mark Andrews. I think Mark Andrews has earned being up there. And then I think it's wide open after that. There's good candidates, Evan Ingram, Darren Waller, Higbee, those guys, but they have their own concerns, right? Ingram, his health is always a concern. Darren Waller, he faded down the stretch, and then they bring in Henry Ruggs and some new weapons. Tyler Higbee had a tale of 2 seasons. He was non-existent in the first half, and he finished. So into your bet, you're acknowledging like, hey, these top 4 spots are most likely locked and loaded, but if my guy Mike Gesicki can come in there and steal that 5th spot, I'm willing to get some ink to celebrate it, and I think that's a good bet.
Brian, I think that we're gonna draw something up. Finn Addict Network will put your line for a signature, mine. Peter's will get this nice and involved. And I guarantee you by week 12, I am going to I'll have a bag packed just in case. I'll have like a go bag just in case I'm going to get in a fight with someone, but I think my wife might even laugh at it if I have it in a strategic place. So we'll leave that. We'll see if I'm pacing with 5 touchdowns in week 8 or top 5 status, but this is good stuff on Gesicki, on the 2 wide receivers. I know you saw while we were talking a lot of that Gesicki stuff. Before we leave, the wide receiver and tight end situation, was there any overall last thoughts on what you noticed from the eye test on Gesicki? Because there's one thing that I want to talk about after you tell me what you noticed that I think is his greatest factor.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he has every bit of athleticism that you could dream of from a tight end. I mean, 4.5, 440 at his height, 6'6", is absolutely insane. Gives him a 95th percentile speed score. He has a 99th percentile burst score, which speaks to his agility, which is incredible. 100th percentile catch radius with the length of his arm. So every single physical tool you could want. And I do think it's going to come down to how they utilize them this season. I think a lot of people are pushing, as you guys mentioned, to him to be that kind of 3rd wide receiver. And if they really unleash him in that regard, as opposed to making him more of a blocking tight end that has to stay in a lot, I think that's going to be the key to really unlocking him as a massive fantasy player, because like I said, all the measurables, he checks literally every box.
Two things that scare me about him, just for Jason getting that tattoo, is the red zone. You know, he's obviously a huge guy in 6'6", and he can jump through the roof. But Miami has Preston Williams, who's 6'5". They have Devontae Parker, who's 6'4", who can also jump through the roof. They just signed that. They just got the Bears tight end Adam Shaheen, who's 6'7". So just a lot of competition down there in the red zone to get those touchdowns to cement that tattoo.
I think it'll be a good sweat. Like I said, you know, I wouldn't place a bet on him finishing top 5 unless I got really good odds. If you gave me, you know, 10-1 odds on it happening, I'd make that bet, because I do think more than 10% of the time he does. But that's why this is a good bet. Most of the time he's not going to get there, but he has the potential to get that bet. And that's why it's very live, and you're going to have a sweat this whole season.
Every season as a Dolphin fan is a sweat, my friend. And you will see this. I mean, you all know this. And Brian, you know this as well. We're nervous. We're always optimistically nervous. But before we get you out of here, Peter, I know we want to keep this under that, 45-ish minute, we're not exactly micro content like yourself. We're probably like 50 micro content shows. But do you believe in the zero RB strategy? Is this nonsense? Yay or nay? What's going on with the zero RB stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in zero running back as a fantasy strategy. You know, there's all the caveats for it. Depends on your specific format. If you are in a 10-team ESPN standard scoring, zero RB is not going to be the best bet. But the leagues I play in, where there are either really big prize pools at the top, and you're trying to beat a large field, or in leagues where you can start lots of wide receivers, I think this is the optimal strategy for this year. And I think we're set up for a particularly good year in that COVID chaos is going to create a lot of turnover at every position. But in fantasy, starting a backup running back thrust into a new role because a starter gets scratched because of COVID, that's a lot easier for us to project for fantasy wise. Whereas, let's just use the Dolphins example. When Hearns or, Albert Wilson is out, we're here talking about how are those targets going to get evenly distributed across the offense. So I think running backs are going to benefit greatly this year. I think we're going to see a lot of surprise scratches, and that doesn't even account for just the usual injury rate of running backs at such a kind of, bruising position. So the way I think about zero RB is, I don't want to invest a ton in running backs early in my draft. I'd love to get one of the top bell cows. I'm not passing on McCaffrey or Barkley or Kamara. But after that, the guys that have kind of more ambiguous roles, when we're trying to guess, is Nick Chubb going to catch passes or is Kareem Hunt? Those are the guys I'm passing on. And I'd rather just throw as many darts at these backup running backs. Lots of them are rookies. I've been drafting Antonio Gibson everywhere, and all of a sudden you see Geis get released and his value goes up. So I think this year more than ever, you want as many darts on these backup running backs. And, to bring it back to the Dolphins, Jordan Howard and Matt Breida are both going at very palatable price points. I personally prefer Breida just because he's a more explosive player and I think has a little more upside, but I don't begrudge anyone targeting Jordan Howard. And one of the hallmarks of zero RB is we target ambiguous backfields. There's merit to targeting, the Alexander Madison and the Tony Pollard who are behind a stud running back, but then you really do need an injury. Whereas with the case of Howard or Breida, those guys are going to both get touches right out of the gate, and one of them might run away with the job. And so targeting those ambiguous backfields at a cheap cost, that's how you execute zero RB, and that's how you find league winners. So there's my zero RB pulpit preaching for the day.
Brian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm not a zero RB guy. It definitely made a lot of sense. So he might have moved me a little bit shifted me over there a little bit. I do have a question that I want to ask just about the Dolphins. So there's a lot of value. You mentioned Howard and Breida. I think Howard's going 8th round. Breida's about the 9th. We talked about Preston in the 11th or 12th, Gesicki in the 11th, Devontae Parker in the 6th. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was, I believe, over the last 9 weeks of the season last year, was quarterback 2, who will be going undrafted. Who do you think right now of the Dolphins is the best value guy you kind of have to get?
Wow. Honestly, I would probably say that as far as kind of like league winning upside, I think it is Matt Breida. I think Jordan Howard's going to have a pretty defined role. And I think will get the goal line carries. But Jordan Howard at this point in his career, he's a guy that coaches love. He does not miss assignments. He is going to get the job done. He's not going to blow pass protection. He's not going to get you offsides penalties. So he's going to have a role. But what we've seen from Matt Breida, literally the fastest running back in the NFL, according to the next gen stats in the open field. And the knock against Breida has always only been his injury history. He's been one of the most frail running backs in the league. So if we throw out, that as far as just pure upside, Matt Breida is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. I do truly believe that. So if he stays healthy and they give him and commit to giving him, let's say a floor of 15 touches a game, and a few of those are targets, I really think he could smash his ADP, which is right now he's going RB 36. So I think there's a lot of room on the bone for Matt Breida to be a top 24 running back and maybe even more.
So I believe it's Howard. Do you want to do a little tattoo? Too bad if Howard outdoes Breida, you have to get Howard's face on your back, anything like that?
Yeah, my conviction on this hasn't reached tattoo levels. So I guess you can call my bluff on that.
One tattoo designation per show. We'll definitely welcome Pete back on another one if he wants to come on into the fray with that. But Peter, I really want to thank you for coming on and taking time out of your day. I know you're a busy guy. If you can, get us out of here with, any last send off to where everyone can find you again, and just any kind of new things that you're up to. And of course, talk about that micro content stuff for a little bit in a couple of seconds.
Yeah. The micro content is all on Twitter. I am very excited I grew up a Denver Broncos fan. I started playing fantasy football and I stopped caring about the Broncos and I only cared about my team. And then I got caught up in Laird mania and they draft Tua and I'm like, you know what? I'm going back. I'm going to become a Dolphins fan. Fins up. I love how they're building this squad and the kind of long view they're taking and not just trying to stay afloat season after season. They're really, truly trying to build a Super Bowl winning team. I love that they didn't blink and they drafted Tua, injury concerns aside. And so, yeah, I am super stoked to be on the Dolphins train. And I'll just say this. Patrick Laird is going to have a role this year. He is going to catch some passes. He's huge in their special teams. The coaches love him, and he's going to have a role this year, and I'm excited to watch it.
What is your Twitter handle, just for everybody?
Yeah, it's at Peter Overzet, just my full name, all one word.
Awesome.
And we'll make sure we get everyone in text and in tweet to go towards you. So, Peter, again, thank you very much. Brian Burns, any last words for us?
Yeah, just make sure you follow the Fin Addicts Network on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, the Fin Addicts Miami Dolphin podcast, and check us out on Twitter at Fin_Addicts.
For Peter, for Brian, I'm Jason Sarney. For 3 Fin fans, Fins up. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Pete.
Fins up. Take care, guys.
All right, see you guys.